President Biden today formally unveiled new targeted tariffs on Chinese goods. Yahoo Finance executive editor Brian Sozzi spoke with President Joe Biden after the announcement was made.
Mr. President, thank you so much for joining Yahoo Finance. It's an honor to be inside the White House. So you and your administration have taken strong action against China. 100% tariffs on China EVs, 50% tariffs on semiconductors from China. Now, a lot of economists would say this could unleash inflation. How do you convince the American public that this will cause inflation, and why so targeted with the tariffs?
Look, China is fundamentally underrating their entire industries. They're just over. They flood a market. They pay whatever it takes to flood it. They make sure to put everybody else out of business and they take over. Or, for example, even if you want it for the longest time, if you want to do business in China, guess what? You have to have a 51% Chinese owner. You have to make sure that you're, in fact, going to make sure that they have access to the intellectual property. It goes on and on. It's about being fair. And look, it's about saving American jobs. Because if we allow them to continue what they're doing, to flood the market with EVs that are incredibly cheap, they're not making any money on them, deliberately doing it to put other people out of business. So we're going to protect the American auto workers, we're going to protect American steel and American aluminum.
Do you believe this will lead to retaliation from China?
Well, I'm sure China will talk a lot about it, but the fact is China already is what you might say way over their skis on this. What they'll do, I don't think it'll lead to any international conflict or anything like that. But I think they'll probably try to figure out how they can raise tariffs maybe on products that are unrelated.
Lastly, Mr. President, over 15 million jobs have been created under your watch. The unemployment rate under 4% for 27 straight months. The stock market at a record high. Why don't households feel wealthy right now?
Well, first of all, if you look at the report coming out of the Michigan survey, over 60% of the people in America feel they're personally in good shape. They're personally in good shape. But they look out and they say the rest of the world's not in good shape. Other people aren't in good shape. I think inflation has gone slightly up. It was at 9% when I came in, and it's now down around 3%. But the fact is that I think people are just uncertain. And that's why we got to be steady, stay the course, and continue to produce these incredible jobs. And by the way, the pay for the jobs are outpacing the inflation rate they're paying. We're going to be able to deal with this. It's going to take a little more time, but we're just focused on it.
Mr. President, thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Thank you, man.
Thank you.
Yahoo Finance's Rick Newman is joining us now with his takeaways on the China tariff news today. Rick, so the headline of your column, by the way, which I would urge viewers to check out, I think kind of sums it up. Trump called himself a tariff man. Biden looks like one now, too.
He does. Now, there's a continuum here, which is that the whole political world in the United States now is tough on China. I mean, it didn't used to be this way. I mean, this is not the way most people thought during the Obama administration, for example, when we were, competing with China, but we were enjoying all the cheap products that they sent our way. And that was deflationary, by the way. I mean, one of the reasons we had such low inflation for basically a 20-year period was all this cheap stuff from China and other places. That has now completely changed. And what Biden has done is affirm that this is a two-party pivot against China economically. Now, there are some differences here. So Trump did a scattershot approach with his tariffs, and he just basically put tariffs on, it was about half of all Chinese imports, which is way more than what Biden has done here. So Trump just put tariffs on this huge range. It was literally thousands of product lines. And Biden is like 15 product lines, and it really is targeted. You used the word targeted in the intro, it really is. And this does line up with other Biden policy areas, which is build out semiconductor supply chain here in the United States, build out green technology supply chains here in the United States. There are a few medical items on there because of what we learned during the pandemic, which is all this stuff came from China. We couldn't get masks and gloves. So Biden has said, well, we need to just build these assembly lines here in the United States more. So that's mainly what he's trying to do. The question is, are we done? because we're now in a one-upmanship situation between Trump and Biden, and it's not hard to imagine that whoever wins, or even throughout the course of the election for the next 6 months, somebody might say, well, this guy did this, I'm going to double it, I'm going to triple it. We might see Trump coming back and sort of upping the ante.
Well, and for example, Trump has already said, well, he's putting a 100% tariff on Chinese EVs. I would put a 200%.
That's right, yeah.
You know, he said things like that. Again, just as a matter of perspective here, the amount of goods being tariffed under the Trump tariffs was $300 billion.
Right.
The amount here is $18 billion. Right. And I know you've done a little bit of looking into the economic impact of the Trump tariffs. Talk to us about that and what the forecast is for the economic impact of these.
There have now been a variety of economic studies into the effect of the Trump tariffs. As recently as, within the last month, Goldman Sachs did a report on this because they're trying to say, well, we're going to have more tariffs. What happened the last time? There's just not any evidence that the tariffs were good for the U.S. economy. They may have been good for Trump politically. It's possible that he got a little bit more support than he would have otherwise gotten by convincing certain voters in certain targeted industries that he's looking out for you, the steel and aluminum industries, for example. But those tariffs raised U.S. prices. There are a number of studies that say that. And there was no manufacturing renaissance in the United States under Trump. There's just no, and that's what he said. You know, he said he wanted his tariffs to do two things. Number one, he just wanted to reduce the trade deficit because he hated the number. The number was too big, but the number itself it doesn't really mean anything. And then he wanted to reestablish U.S. manufacturing, and there's just no sign that happened under Trump. It does seem to be happening under Biden. And not because of tariffs, but because of the bills that he has signed into law that contain incentives for building this stuff in the United States. That's tax breaks that go to the bottom line of private sector companies that start building these, green energy factories, electric vehicle factories.
But it'll take a while.
Yes, but we're already seeing the factories under construction. I mean, we've been talking about semiconductor plants in New York, in Ohio, and Arizona. Those are going to take a while to build. But the fact that they're getting built means private sector investors are putting the money in because the incentives that Biden signed into law make it more profitable for them to do it. So that when you see the private sector money being committed, that tells you this is coming.
How much do you think of this, and you hinted at this, Rick, is just raw politics in an election year, Biden trying to secure votes in key swing states?
Most to all of it? So economists hate tariffs. Most economists hate tariffs because they're inefficient. They create inefficiencies. So you're starting to get, the government is starting to help private investors determine where to deploy their capital, right? So you're changing the equation in terms of the return on investment in capital. However, there was a very real problem in the United States, which we now call the China shock. We didn't know this was happening as it was happening. But when we finally got the economists doing the research, it is very clear that all this Chinese manufacturing that happened starting when China came to the WTO, which is 2001, really did take millions of U.S. jobs overseas and did hollow out significant portions of the heartland, in particular the so-called Rust Belt. The data now makes it very clear that happened. And guess what? U.S. politicians did nothing about it. We had very ineffective policies in place. That there were some retraining programs for people when the factory leaves. They didn't work. And that's why Trump got elected. That is the number one reason Trump got elected in 2016, because he appealed to those people. He called it American carnage. When he said, make America great again, what he meant, or what those people heard, was bring those jobs back. That's not easy to do, and it might be impossible to do, but we've now got politicians in both parties are now going.
It is so interesting, Rick, that I think you were discussing that in that, correct me if I'm wrong, but you seem to be suggesting Trump was kind of a lone voice for a period in this criticism of free trade, or certainly one of the few. It is now consensus.
There are a bunch of areas where Trump had the right idea for the wrong reason.
Well, and
this is one of them.
What he did not result in bringing those jobs.
But I'm saying that
back,
criticism,
right?
That's correct.
But the point,
and it was even worse because China put tariffs on U.S. agricultural products, and we had to bail out our farmers because they could no longer sell stuff to China.
But don't you think, Rick, there was a shift in narrative there? Who was with Trump when he was saying that? I mean, that did seem to be a minority opinion at one point that has now shifted, as you point out, a real one point where right and left seem to come together.
So I think Trump does have a knack for putting his finger on something that is wrong. So he figured out, he was right, that American carnage, that people reacted to that because they saw it all around them. The factories disappeared and there are no jobs left. People saw that, and he appealed to that. His just prescription was wrong. So he saw it, and yes, sure, give him credit for highlighting that and figuring that out, or he just does have a knack for these things somehow, but a lot of times the prescription is wrong. So yes, what started, it's kind of like Biden's doing Trump 2.0. He's trying to, new and improved, try to do it better than the first time around. And he might. This is, I mean, whether you like tariffs or not, his approach is fairly shrewd.
All right, well, we're going to talk much more about this.
Yep.
Rick, thank you so much for your perspective
Thanks,
there.
guys.